Hey, this is Bart Sharp, and this is Becoming Quantum Conscious on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7 and 105.3. And we are broadcasting out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. And I am Bart Sharp from Austin, Texas. And our guest, Clarke Strand, is from the Catskills in New York State, out in a cabin out in the woods someplace. If you read his books, you'll get a really wonderful image of what that is. Also, I just wanted to mention that we are on Roku, also Facebook, YouTube, and other platforms. So we're all over the world. And we just welcome everybody in to this program, Becoming Quantum Conscious. And today with Clarke Strand, who's an author of many books and also editor, Zen Buddhist, a guy who walks in the dark. And his latest book is this. I want to get it up close, Waking Up to the Dark. And it's just a beautiful cover. And it looks like you're in the dark kind of when you venture visually into this book, because that's so much about what this book is about. Welcome, Clarke Strand. I'm really happy you're here.
Thanks, Bart. I'm so happy to be talking to you today and to your viewers and listeners. Thanks
Yes.
for having me on the show.
And they are really into a treat today, because this book, I've read it twice. And I do not usually pick up a book and read it twice within a 4-month period. However, this book is one that has some of the most profound information that is subtle, that slowly comes up and wakes you up, kind of like, oh my God, what is that? It's really wonderful. This is a journey about a man who walks in the dark, driven to walk in the dark as somewhere in childhood to teenage years, and it becomes a part of his spiritual journey amongst other things. But it's always this connection he has to the earth, and it's a valid spiritual connection, one that hasn't been discussed probably in modern times when we think about modern spirituality, but it's always been something people have used throughout who knows how long. Um, and I wanted to start, I'm going to throw out some quotes from this book, because it's almost like prose in places that just opens you up to think, to be with the words, and to let them unravel in your own consciousness. So this is the last paragraph of the book. It's the gospel according to darkness. And it says, as in the heavens, so it is on earth. I alone am, but I am not alone. For you are with me and within me. Your heartbeat is my heartbeat, and your breathing is mine. And of course, this is a conversation between Earth and the person, I'm guessing. What response do you have, Clarke?
Well, those last 3 pages of the book, which you've drawn from here, are the only pages in the book that I didn't write. They are the words of Our Lady of Woodstock, and
Ah,
the whole book really is one way of looking at it is it's a very long introduction to a very short book. The real book is the Gospel According to the Dark, and it's the last 3 pages of the book.
hmm.
And maybe at some point in the show I'll tell you the circumstances under which those words came to me. But for now, I'll say that yeah, it is very much a conversation between the earth and a listener, right? The reader,
Yes.
one, whoever reads these words, right, is receiving them directly from, our mother, the great mother, sometimes she was called. In more recent millennia, she's been called, the Virgin Mary and other figures.
Yes. And that's what we're talking about, is this being that has many names,
Yeah, that's right.
and it is of the earth, and like so many people are seeking these days, how do I have this profound spiritual connection? And they're trying to find it in so many ways. And for you, it's about being in the dark.
Yeah. Well, it always has been, from the very beginning. I mean, I didn't really know what was going on when I first started waking up in the middle of the night, waking up to the dark, as it were, and wandering around. I was a young boy. Well, I grew up down south in northern Alabama. We lived a block away from a golf course, and my parents, I think, maybe put me to bed not too long after dark. So I would lie in bed for about 4 hours sleeping, and then I would wake up. And in the beginning, I just lay quietly in bed, but like any 8-year-old boy, I easily got bored, and so I began to wander around the house. From there, I stepped out onto the back deck to look at the stars, and then finally, I thought, well, why not? Nobody's telling me not to. Nobody else is awake. I'll just go out on the golf course. And so I started walking around 8 years old on this golf course alone in the middle of the night. And I absolutely loved it. And I felt such peace or such beauty. Um, I was alone, but I never felt alone, never felt lonely. Uh,
Mm,
I continued doing this, throughout my childhood. By the time I was a teenager, we had moved to Atlanta, Northwest Atlanta. The city back then, was not as much, wasn't as big a sprawl, as much of a sprawling metropolis as it is today. And so, just across the river, you could find, those big, heady, dark spaces in the hills. And I would wake in the middle of the night and walk out there. I continued it into college. And when I became a Zen Buddhist monk in the 1980s, living in a remote monastery in the Catskill Mountains where the only light after dark was candlelight, there was nothing to keep me, when the other monks had gone to bed, to getting up and wandering around the lake and the graveyard. And, there was no electric light. There was no electric light bulb for miles in any direction. It's just perfect darkness. Very
so
beautiful.
so was there something in this process, because you've been doing this for, well, we don't want to tell your age, but you've been doing this for a long time. And
Yeah.
also, we just want to tell the viewers and listeners, if you have questions for Clarke, just come on the chat and put them out there. We just wanted to welcome Kathy. She showed up. I just put her on. I'll put her back again. Welcome Kathy to the show, and she's from Ontario, Canada.
Hmm.
But I wanted to ask you a question. Do you think that your body has changed, or your sensory systems have changed by being in the dark so much?
Hmm. Well, I don't think so. I wouldn't quite describe it as change. It's more of a reversion to our natural state. I didn't really know what was going on. I just did this naturally. I always thought of myself as a bit eccentric, perhaps, that I would do this. And not many people knew about it. I didn't talk to very many people about it. I think my Zen master, the abbot of the monastery, knew that I was getting up in the middle of the night and wandering around, in the mountains, but he never said anything to me about it. But so I really didn't have any context for it. And then in the mid 90s, after I'd left the monastery and married and had children, uh, I discovered an article written by a New York Times journalist reporting on a study that had been done at the National Institute of Health by a man named Thomas Ware. Thomas Ware was the guy who basically discovered seasonal affective disorder. He was a specialist in research on circadian rhythms, and he did a famous sleep study where he took ordinary people off the streets of Bethesda, Maryland, and took them off all forms of artificial illumination for a month.
Wow.
And, and what he discovered was that for the first 3 weeks, everybody slept for, on average, about an hour to an hour and a half longer, repaying what we're called the national sleep debt, right? Because Americans are chronically sleep deprived. But at week 3, something happened to every member of the study, every subject. They all began to sleep for 4 hours and then wake to darkness for 2 hours of what we're at first called quiet rest. And then they would sleep for another 4. And so they were sleeping 8 hours, but now those 8 hours were divided into, what sleep scientists call bimodal sleep. What Weir discovered was that prior to the Industrial Revolution, human beings all across the planet slept like this in 2 blocks. But
Wow.
the big takeaway was what was happening in those 2 hours in the middle of the night. Ware discovered that his subjects were not completely asleep and not completely awake. He discovered that the hormone prolactin, which is the chemical that reaches elevated levels in nursing mothers, right, when they're nursing their babies, it's also the chemical that that elevates, that rises in the
Hmm.
bodies of birds when they are roosting on their nests. So it is the same chemical that keeps our bodies still while we're sleeping. What we discovered was that if people wake up, people who are keeping the lights on until midnight and then falling asleep for a restless 6 hours before they wake up and go to work, those people, if they wake up in the middle of the night, their prolactin levels immediately fall. But
Yeah.
if you give people the darkness that the body needs, what happens is you wake and your prolactin levels remain at sleep levels. So your body is deeply calm and your mind is awake. And so where subjects reported feeling a peace that they had never experienced before in their entire lives. And so what modern people tend to experience as insomnia, what some people informally call the hour of the wolf, right? That
Hmm.
that that fretful, self-judgment and worry and anxiety and that worrying mind that people experience when they wake up and can't get back to sleep. We're discovered that if you gave people enough darkness to work with, the body would reset itself to a Paleolithic pattern of sleep that was still hardwired in the human body, and it would produce an experience so different from the hour of the wolf, you might as well call it the hour of God, right?
Mm. And maybe that's a lot in your attitude when you do wake up at those times. Like a lot of people are saying, well, something's wrong.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a lot of people who have adrenal fatigue. And I saw this with, I was a school teacher, and a lot of the teachers, when they would get into the school year and the stress would be on, and as a teacher, it almost feels like you're constantly working all the time. Even when you go home, you still haven't left work because teaching is a very absorbing profession. It takes a lot of intensity to do it, and therefore hard to unwind from.
Yeah.
And these people would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning a lot.
Yeah.
But maybe if the attitude was like there's nothing wrong with me, and we would like be okay with that,
Yeah.
maybe this would start to shift for a lot of people.
Well, since Ware's research came out, sleep scientists have discovered, and I talked to several of them in my research for the book, and they told me that nowadays, when people come to them saying that they wake in the middle of the night,
Hmm.
the first thing they do is they say, well, that's quite natural. So don't worry about it.
Right.
And most people, most of these sleep specialists told me that most of the people they tell that to go home and never come back again. Right? Because they go, oh, so
It's
I don't
too
need to
pro.
worry. I don't need to worry about this. This is natural. They explain bimodal sleep And
Mm-hmm.
in fact, what really is happening is that we have created a late assisted state of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we are extending the length of our days artificially, right? So that
Yes.
we are compressing our sleep nights, like our work days, into convenient 8-hour blocks. But we're not meant to sleep that way. And
It's
it's hardwired into our body to sleep in two segments like this. Like we are programmed genetically to do that from Paleolithic times for hundreds and thousands of years. And so as
and
you get older, your metabolic force begins to weaken. So especially people in later middle age to old age, they find that their resistance is lowered. They can no longer override that ancient pattern, and so they start to wake in the middle of the night. What's really happening is that their bodies are sort of giving up and reverting to the old pattern.
almost like it's a period of those few hours, because this is happening to me, and this is really really gets interesting. Ever since I've read your book, it seems to be more actively happening.
Mm.
Almost like that invitation is spotted up in my body as saying, pay attention, this is okay.
Yeah,
That you wake up at these times. For me, I do mantras
yeah.
and lay
Me,
in bed
me too. That's what I do.
yeah, who am I? What is God? That's my favorite one. It's a
Mm.
Saint Francis of Assisi, and it's
Yeah,
two
beautiful.
questions: Who am I? And then
Mm.
what is God? And you're opening up those energies to
Mm.
live inside of you. It's so
Yeah,
simple that you can stay with it.
yeah.
Um,
That's right.
and your invitation is get up, be in the dark, maybe outside if you possibly can, um, and really commune with nature and the earth, because that's a component that can open the spiritual side of you even more so.
Yeah. Well, there are people who can, and because of their life circumstances, and there are people
Sure.
who can't. A great many women read the book and said, "Well, I wish I could go out walking in the middle of the night, but they don't feel safe." And I completely
Hmm.
understand that. I mean, I'm 6'2", and when I'm out walking in the middle of the night, people, the occasional car that passes me tends to give me a wide berth.
Is that a man or Frankenstein? I don't know.
Yeah, right. So I don't. If there's anything to fear in the dark, I guess they assume maybe it's me because
Yeah.
I'm out walking. But some people can, and others can't. There are communities that, for thousands of years, have created an environment that's sort of the perfect incubator for this period that we call the hour of God. And these are contemplative or monastic communities. Part of my research in the book was to track down all the various different extant or living forms of the hour of God in the various religious traditions, and to talk to the people who still practiced them. So I talked to Hasidic Jews who rise in the middle of the night to perform a practice called Hitbodedut, or a free-form dialogue, talking out loud to God, usually outdoors,
Mm.
like in a forest or a field. I talked to imams who would wake for tahajjud, which is the practice initiated by Muhammad that involved rising in the middle of the night to be with God. The belief among Muslims was that during the hour of God, that gap between the first 4 hours and the second 4 hours of sleep was the time that Allah came closest to the earth to listen to prayers.
Mm.
And I talked to people who practiced yoga nidra, Buddhists who did the same thing. I had a correspondence with a Carthusian novice master. All right, this is the most strictly enclosed of the Catholic orders, and I believe the only Catholic order, other than a few Carmelite convents here and there, where they still rise for matins in the middle of the night to chant the Psalms. Right, they go to sleep for 4 hours and they rise to chant the Psalms. So this same pattern existed in these contemplative communities all over
Yes.
the world. And those are usually the only places that you can still find this practice. But once upon a time, and not so long ago, this was essentially a nightly meditation retreat for every Homo sapiens on Earth. People would naturally wake to this state of mind because they weren't artificially extending the range of their waking consciousness with artificial illumination. And so they
Yes.
naturally woke to this state, which the writer of the Book of Psalms, I'm sorry, the author of the Song of Songs, which is a beautiful love poem in the Bible, described as, "I sleep, but my heart is awake." I
Yes.
sleep, but my heart is awake. That was the way the lover describes it to her beloved in the Song of Songs. Those are the words she uses to describe that state of mind that you wake to in the middle of the night.
And so that is really wonderful stuff. And I wanted to add, if you are in a place in the world that is fairly warm weather at night, you can just go out and sit on your porch and put your feet on the ground and say mantras and connect with this being that
Right,
we call
right,
Earth.
right.
And one of the things that shows up for me, as I have a tendency to ask spontaneous questions as I listen to you, is, there's the reality of the connection to the sun and that we see during the daytime, and that power of all of what the sun emanates and gives us, which is wonderful. But
Yeah,
at night, it's a totally different reality, and something else emerges,
yeah, it does.
and a different reality that is so much about the earth. And there's this great quote, and this is at the last chapter. And you told me that you didn't write this last 3 pages. However, all I can say is it's really good.
That
uh,
was what I thought when I first read them.
yeah, well, it is your book, even though you may not have written this. This is you. This is so much about the book. It
Mm.
says, I want to make sure I got this right. Okay, be still, be silent. Awaken to the hour of wonders when all things belong to the body of earth and sky. I am the substance of all before their making and the rest to which they return. Lift a stone from the earth and let it fall. It can only seek its mother. And to me, that's like there's a connectedness with all things that we're starting to open up to in this intimacy with the earth.
Yeah.
And the more we're there, the more we acknowledge it, the more it grows inside of us to help with
Yeah.
this journey that we're on.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And from what I've understood, you wouldn't really call yourself a psychic or an intuitive or any of the things out there. That's you're more like, I am present. I'm an editor. I write books.
Right.
I do these type of things that are very much here and now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet,
I didn't, when the events described in this book, in the latter part of the book, began to unfold, like the part of the book called The Black Madonna and then The
mhm,
Gospel According to the Dark. This began in the summer of 2011. And prior to that, I didn't have one book in my vast spiritual library of world classics, world
that
related
could
classics.
prepare you for that situation.
That could prepare me for it. I didn't have one book on the divine feminine even. It
Well,
wasn't something that was even remotely interesting to me. For
I would like to say this about the third chapter. This book is broken up in like a story of Clarke Strand as a child and walking in the dark and those experiences. the second chapter, and I may be messing this up, but I'll do my best, is a lot of the studies, the logistics, kind of the philosophy of all of this.
Yeah.
But the third chapter, uh, Clarke has a very direct physical experience with a Madonna being,
Yeah.
which I find and I'm not talking about somebody that is ethereal, that you can see but not touch, or you hear but don't see. This is someone he felt, touched, experienced, had a conversation with many times
Yeah. Yeah.
in
No,
2011.
that's right. Summer of 2011. Perdita likes to say, my wife, who's a wife and fellow writer, a co-author of The Way of the Rose, a book we wrote together.
Yes, yes. This is a wonderful book about how to use the rosary. And it's not like a big Catholic background. This is looking in the exploration that the rosary is something much older, ancient, that
That's
is
right.
used to center people and bring them into a deeper state of consciousness with the beloved, the earth,
Right.
Mother
Yeah.
Mary, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. That's right. So Perdita, my wife and co-author, she liked to joke that after I left Zen Buddhism in 1990, I spent the next 20 years trying to get patriarchy right. And I
Good
didn't,
luck.
I didn't know that that's what I was doing. Like I was completely unaware. Like I couldn't see it. I couldn't see I couldn't frame that experience. Like, if you had said that to me, I'd say, what are you even talking about? I'm just reading all the great classics of world religion, trying to find something, anything that holds up to the demands of the 21st century, right? I had developed a kind of a motto as part of a religious think tank for Newsweek, Washington Post in the early 2000s. I developed a kind of a credo, ecology, not theology. And
Mm.
I had gone back through all of these traditions. I had I couldn't see that they were all patriarchal traditions, that that's what they had in common. They
Mm-hmm.
just all seemed very different. And I thought that in one of them, I would find some kind of teaching that could prepare us for the challenges ahead, right? Species extinction, climate change, resource depletion, vanishing water supplies, pollution, the list goes on and on.
Yes, yes.
And collapsing, empires. So,
And here you are on this journey with, the dark and the Madonna and all of this stuff that is totally unique. I've never read about it, not like this, with somebody that is in the modern world.
right.
Maybe in the ancient world,
Yeah.
but not in the
Yeah.
modern world.
Right. So I wasn't really prepared for this, to say the
Oh,
least.
yeah, surprise. Yeah. So I just want to ask you a question. What do you think, waking up to the dark and being this guy who does these walks, practices the rosary, why do you think this happened to you? You go from that very Zen Buddhist philosophy, and then you have something very mystical happen that people would give their eye teeth to have. I mean, I got a radio show and you got the Madonna. I'm really envious, to be
Well,
honest.
I get asked this question a lot, and the answer is I have absolutely no idea. I will tell you a story though that I think has some bearing on it. They There is a tradition, in India, right, where a person will have a dream about the goddess inhabiting a rock that is to be found in a lake, usually, or a stream, or nearby pond or river. And that person will see in the dream where the stone or the rock is to be found. They'll retrieve the rock, they'll bring it back to their home, they'll make offerings to it and begin to pray. And the idea is the goddess is in the rock. And if the goddess answers prayers, then she gets a statue. And if she answers more prayers, then she gets a little shrine. And if she answers even more prayers, she gets a temple. And this is how, nearly all of the great temples to Kali, Mother Kali, right, were
Hmm.
established in Bengal. So there
Wow.
was so there was a uh, anthropologist who went to Bengal to interview the people about this process, right? And at one point, she asked people, who had had this sort of experience, well, how did the goddess get into the stone? And they all answer the same way. They say, how are we supposed to know the answer to a question like that? How are we supposed to know the answer to that? Who knows how the goddess gets in the stone? That's her business. She knows how to do it. We don't know how to do it. So that's really my answer. I have no idea.
Well,
A sort of
well,
irritable, overeducated spiritual intellectual was hardly a clear choice, for an apparition of the Virgin Mary, especially
well,
somebody who was completely done with religion, right?
well,
Conventional religion.
and that's the interesting thing. It's like, how we could almost see that some of the religions of this world are almost too weird to believe in,
Yeah,
and they have all kinds of flaws, but
right.
yet they work.
Yep.
People have all of these great things happening, and it's just like the story you mentioned. Maybe those people that found the rock, that built a shrine, they were part of that portal opening, and the
Yeah,
portal opening was
right.
happening
Yeah.
because it's a participation
Yeah.
with everybody involved.
Well, I will say this, and I think that, if you read the literature on apparitions,
Mm.
especially apparitions of the Virgin Mary, there have been quite a few of them, since
Yes,
like in the modern age, since
I go
1830.
to a few of them in France, and they're
Yeah,
amazing.
I'm sure. So if you read the literature, you often find, that the apparitionists, basically say what I've said is that they don't have a clue why Our Lady appeared to them and spoke to them. They don't think about it very often. It's not the experience itself is so overwhelmingly convincing that one stops thinking about such questions and trying to answer them because her message, what she says, is the important thing, and everything else is really just secondary. So you just sort of forget about everything else and just do that.
Well, when you start to go into why it happened, you're really going into your head,
Yeah,
and this is more of a visceral, full body experience,
yeah.
really. I need to break a little bit to
Hmm.
say this is Becoming Quantum Conscious on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7, 105.3, and we're also on Roku. You can catch us on the cable world and see our pretty faces on television. That's why I wear a button up shirt. And also on Facebook, YouTube, and various things. My name is Bart Sharp. I have a website called bartsharp.com and do spiritual tours to Southwest France on the path of Mary Magdalene, Jesus, and all the ancient energies there. Mary Magdalene France tours. You can find Clarke Strand in this lovely book that he has written. There we go, Waking Up to the Dark. You can find this if you go to www.wayoftherose.org. And I have not put up the banner to just give this ticker going on, but this is www.wayoftherose.com, no, .org, excuse me. And this is a beautiful book on the rosary that he and his wife, Perdita Finn, wrote, and they alternate chapters. So you hear Perdita first chapter, you hear Clarke, and then through the book, you really can't tell who is who. And through their stories, they just take you on this mystical journey, just as this book, Waking Up to the Dark, really does. Takes you on this amazing mystical journey. And for this next part, I'm going to read another chapter, and this is one from the Black Madonna chapter. There's in this interaction. Uh, in the same way that everyone without exception has been born from a mother, everyone returns to the mother as well. She is our origin, our destination, and our present place of rest. We cannot take one step apart from her body before birth or after death, nor even while we are alive. She is the mother of all things, the living body of the world. And so much about this book is a reminder that we are connected to the earth, and it's best we really get aware of that everything we do has a connection to that or is in the opposite direction, or maybe not into that direction. Maybe that's a little bit strong. But when we start to realize that, our whole consciousness starts to change.
Yeah. You know, Bart, one of the things that happened when the book was first published back in 2015, the copy that you held up is a recent reprint of the book. But when the book was first published in 2015, people who read it, I think, often thought that they should get up and walk in the dark, right? Or that they should, basically unscrew all the light bulbs in their house and try to experience, total darkness after dusk, right? And some people, I think, were maybe able to do that, or they lived in circumstances where they could. Most people, couldn't. And so I got a lot of very sort of melancholy, wistful emails and letters from people saying, I would really love to go back to this state of consciousness. I feel it within myself when I wake at night and I long for it, but I don't know how to get there. And so I began to think about the darkness in a slightly different way. And I went back to the work of a Jesuit historian of technology who I had read in my research for the book, a man named John Staudenmeier. And Staudenmeier gave a lecture at, I think, Pennsylvania State University, a Boardman lecture that, the title of which was Electric Lights Cast Long Shadows. And it was all about the loss of the holy dark. And Staudenmeier's basic idea was that with higher and higher levels of artificial illumination over the past few thousand years, human beings have become progressively more and more cut off from the soul, more and more cut off from their spiritual nature. He believed that one of the things that artificial light did, like not just artificial light to read by in an office during the daytime, but stadium lights, billboard lights, floodlights, cities that are lit 24 hours a day, right? We're talking about big lights, big city lights. He said one of the things they do is they convince us that everything can be seen or should be seen, that everything can be known, everything can be made clear, and everything ultimately that can be made clear can be understood and therefore controlled. Now, Staudenmeier never quite got as far as stating it just this baldly, but the essence of his way of thinking on this subject was that light is primarily what fuels an anthropocentric way of thinking. Our modern anthropocentric, human-centered way of thinking, where humans are in charge or should be in charge, where human welfare is more important than anything else in the world, where our goal is ultimately just to redesign the whole planet so that it becomes a theme park open 24 hours a day for Homo sapiens, right?
Oh, yes.
He believed that light was the thing that drove this impulse. So
And
what I realized was that anything that short circuits that or takes us off of that treadmill, like meditation, mindfulness, right? Yoga. For some people, it's knitting. For some people, it's keeping a dream journal. There are a lot
mm,
of ways that we can tune in to a this older, more numinous way of thinking, and begin to rebalance our lives so that we're not drunk on light as a culture, so that we're not so super saturated with it.
it's so true. And it's, it's, it's a dichotomy between the intellect and rationale versus wisdom and intuition,
Right. Right.
that we can connect to those things. Sympathetic nervous system versus parasympathetic nervous system is
Right.
another way to state it,
Yeah.
which is a deeper place. But I just like the idea that you bring down to this book, that when you're in the dark and you're out, and it can just be in your backyard, and you have your feet on the ground, something emerges, something connects. It's very natural, very easy. And then doing a meditation is actually a lot more work, actually, because in some ways, because we both probably meditate a lot, and we know what that discipline is, that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
steadily give to that,
Right.
and cultivate that interior reality.
Well, you mentioned mantra, Bart, that you wake in the middle of the night
Hmm.
and say mantra. And one of the things that most of these practices had in common, I want to say all of them, I think maybe there were a couple that were silent, but most of them, nearly all of them, involved chanting or reciting mantras, like chanting the divine office, reciting the Psalms, as a Catholic monk or nun would have done during the Middle Ages in the middle of the
Yes.
night, right? Or chanting the Lotus Sutra for Buddhist priests observing this ritual even today in Japan. People rising to say Yoga Nidra, to perform Yoga Nidra. There were mantras and various rituals that were associated with these practices. And the wonderful thing about these mantras is that they're as easy as just speaking, right? You don't have to monitor your state of consciousness or try to modify it. You just fall into the easy rhythm of this
It
vocal prayer.
it does, and um, it also helps your mind have something to do
Yeah,
while your body goes into this deeper state.
that's
I
right.
think it's also. I mean, I do a lot of activations. I activate within the sun. Uh, I astral travel. I meditate with crystals. I meditate with power stones, like the people that are connecting with the goddess. But I haven't really contemplated it as a goddess. But
Mm,
all of what that does is activate vibrations in my body. There's so many ways that you can get there to have this wonderful reality.
right.
I want to change the tune a little bit and go back to the Madonna, um, and just ask a personal question. What did it feel like to be in her presence? What happened to you?
Well, I described that, in the, I guess really that's the primary subject of part three of the book, The Black Madonna. And all I will say is that I was really unprepared to experience anything like this. I had never had visions. I think, I've spent a lot of time meditating, certainly in a quiet monastery. So I'd had a lot of spiritual experiences, but I'd never had anything that I would describe as a sort of a visionary type of experience. In fact, as a Zen Buddhist monk and ultimately as a teacher of Zen meditation, I had been taught that such experiences were what Japanese Zen Buddhists called makyo, or illusion. And the received wisdom was that when they occurred, like in deep meditation, if you had some sort of visionary experience, you would immediately just dismiss it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't cling to it. You wouldn't pay attention to it. Maybe you just sort of stare it down. So
Mm.
I will say that on the night of June 16th, 2011, when I got up in the middle of the night to go for my walk, and I felt a hand on my right shoulder, and a male voice, spoke directly into my ear and said, "Don't go out tonight. Uh, Stay inside. Be calm and very, very still." Later, reading about apparitions, I learned that oftentimes some figure would appear prior to at least the first appearance of Our Lady, to prepare you for it. And I was glad that that happened. But I didn't at that time, I'd read none of that literature, had no idea what was happening. But I'd never heard a voice before, not like that.
Yeah.
So I decided to honor it, and I positioned myself on the couch in our downstairs living room by the window. It was in the dark, and I meditated. I knew how to do what the voice had told me to do, to get very calm and still inside, because I'd been a Zen Buddhist monk. So I did that. And I stayed in that state for about 40 minutes until I sensed the presence of someone right beside me in the room. And so I opened my eyes, and first I saw two reed stalks blowing in the wind. It was as if I was in the middle of a marsh, maybe. The house had disappeared. There was just darkness. And there were just these two reed stalks blowing in the wind, and then they vanished. And in their place was the face of a girl of about 17 years old, a roundish, pale face, freckles around her nose, auburn short cropped hair, hazel eyes, and an X of black electrical tape over her mouth. And I saw her, and my first impulse on seeing this was, oh, yeah, this is what the Zen masters taught me. This is Makyo. And so my first impulse was to stare her down. And that lasted all of about 3 seconds. And then, I like to think, well, that was, I'd stopped being a Zen monk. I'd stopped being a Zen monk 21 years earlier, right? It'd been 21 years old early, 21 years since I had been responsible for a monastery, since I've been like a head monk and, but you can take the boy out of the monastery. It takes a lot longer to take the monastery out of the boy.
Well,
So that that moment was the death of my Zen career, because what I thought, well, the Zen masters were wrong. This is not illusion. I thought I looked at her face and I thought, she is realer than anything I've ever seen. And if she's illusion, that means I'm less than illusion, right? This can't possibly be an illusion. And
no.
so I did what I think anyone would have done in that situation, because she clearly wanted the tape off of her mouth. I had no idea how it had gotten on there, who had put it there, but it was clearly there to silence her. And so I reached forward, and careful not to touch her body, because I had no idea. I was in unfamiliar territory. I had no idea what would happen if I touched her. I was afraid, I think, to touch her. And I reached out and I grabbed the corner of the tape and I pulled it back from her lips. I could feel it pulling against her skin. And she gave a great gasp, as if she hadn't been able to breathe. And I thought she would say something, but she didn't. And I started to speak, and she shook her head, said, "No, nothing can be said." And I just looked at her, for I don't know how long. And we just looked at one another. And then finally, the Zen part of my brain won out. And I closed my eyes and went back to meditating. And when I opened them again, 40 minutes later, she was gone. But
Wow.
after that, she was always there. I could feel her presence even when I couldn't see her. I didn't see her all the time, but I could feel her presence. And when I woke up in the morning, I could feel her right there. And she's been there ever since. And she
Wow.
began to speak,
Even today.
even today. Yeah.
Wow.
Two
So,
weeks later, she began to speak. And then eventually she began to to give the messages that we share on Way of the Rose on the 16th of every month.
Yes.
And the Gospel According to the Dark was given that first year, which is the what you read at the beginning of the show. Those last 3 pages of the book, The Gospel According to the Dark, that was dictated later that same year in the fall, sometime in October. I don't know the exact date. And she appeared and dictated that to me. And I don't have any memory of writing it down. But when it was
There it
over,
is.
I saw that there was a notebook next to the bed, and the words, I had written the words down, and it was my handwriting,
Mm.
but
You
I
know,
didn't write them.
it's when I read books, I'm a psychic intuitive. I do all of that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And when I read books, sometimes something just rivets in my body because they're so deep and true. And this could be something very intellectual, like, for example, The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd. That book rivets in my body because it's so true with the knowledge it has.
Yeah.
However, when I read this book, it goes into something so profound, like you've crossed over to a place that is very unique and special. And, as I read this book and contemplate it, what it teaches me is that there's important information here that can help me find my own path. My path is not Clarke Strand's, it's really my own.
Yeah.
But this book has given me some real gems on how to incorporate that and how to take concepts and apply them to my own life. Whether you're walking in the dark or uh, taking some of these concepts, something will likely pop up for you to enhance your spiritual journey. So I'm a big advocate. I'm a big fan with all of this. It's an amazing book, and it's just an amazing family. You have your wife, Perdita, who has Take Back the Magic and other texts that are really great. She was on the show last month. You have a daughter, Sophie Strand, who wrote The Madonna's Secret. It's just been published and out, and I'm reading that, and she'll be on this show next month. So
Wonderful.
We're taking this big journey to the Catskills on becoming quantum conscious and learning all about the strands. Your wife told me, because I always ask authors, well, who do you recommend? She's like, Clarke and Sophie, and gave me some other people to check out. And I have to say, Sophie's book, Sophie Strand, the Madonna Secret, is profound.
Yeah.
I don't know how she got all of this information, but it's really good.
It's
And I
a
want you to,
mystery.
it's an amazing book. And just to FYI. So I want you to think about this for just a second as I give my closings. But, just a minute of any type of advice and guidance that you can give the listeners today to send that voice out. And as you contemplate that, I'm going to say that this is Clarke Strand, and his book is Waking Up to the Dark. And you can find his book and all about Clarke at www.wayoftheRose.org. WayoftheRose.org. This is Bart Sharp and Becoming Quantum Conscious at United Public Radio and UFO Paranormal Radio Network. And we are on Roku, Facebook, YouTube, and other venues. Just go into UPRN to find out about us. And next week, we are going to have a very special guest. That would be Raymond Grace. Raymond Grace is probably the most renowned pendulum or teacher in the United States that I know of. He calls it dowsing, but he is a dowser of magnitude. And so it'll be an entertaining hour about Raymond Grace next week. I'm just really crazy about having him on the show. So, what would you tell the people out there? Give them a minute of advice or guidance.
Well, Bart, you told me that you've spent a lot of time in southwestern France, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So have you ever visited any of the Paleolithic caves, the painted caves?
I spend a lot of time in them, dude.
Aren't they? They're amazing. Perdita
Yeah.
and I journeyed to the Dordogne region to visit those caves, and we wrote about them in the
Hmm.
Way of the Rose.
Yes, I
You
remember.
know, some of them are caves, but there are also these escarpments or rock outcroppings, right? That are just places where the rock, and there are a lot of them in that part of the world, where the rock sort of juts out and forms a sort of a natural roof. So it's sort of
Hmm.
like an open air tent that it
Yes.
creates. And human beings lived in these, under these escarpments they were partially protected from the elements for as long as we've been walking upright, we've been living in these escarpments, right, under these little rock ledges.
Yes.
Well, I like to think of those as being like the shallow caves or the first retreats that human beings went to in order to meditate, right, or to pray. These are probably the very first places where human beings, engaged in what we would call today spiritual practice. But you can create that shallow cave very easily in your own body just by lowering your eyes a little bit, lowering your lids. You see pictures of the Buddha, right? And his lids are only half open usually, letting in less light. So this is a very simple thing that anyone can do wherever they are at any time. You can just you can just close your eyes about half the way, and you're like it's like you're under one of those old escarpments. You
Mm.
created you've got a little bit of a foothold, even on the brightest day. Even in situations where your rational mind and your anxiety and your planning and your to-do list are just like dogs nipping at your heels, right, trying to get your attention and drive you this way and that, you can stop and do that and just breathe. It's easier
Yes.
than meditation because there's really no goal other than to create a little bit of a slightly dimmer world, right? Where things are a little less certain, where you're open to mystery, and where you can begin to attend to the voice of the divine, which is always speaking within you.
Yes, it's a moment to moment process for us all. And we want to string as many of those moments and minutes together with this attention to become greater conscious. And we got to go. Thank you so much, Clarke. It's been a great pleasure being
Well,
with you today.
thank you so much, Bart. Perdita had wonderful things to say about you, and now I understand. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for having me on your show.